last lessons, we learned how the spirit of nationalism grew and surged in the minds of the Indian masses during the colonial period. Because people from diverse sections of the society were exploited by the colonizers. They were filled with anger and hatred and contempt for the colonial officers, which is why they wanted to overthrow the colonial rule. And in this context, the spirit of nationalism did a lot by providing impetus to this anger, to this desire and this tendency to overthrow the colonial rule from the Indian subcontinent. But at the same time, we should also remember that during the early stages, this nationalist sentiment was not very unified. It wasn't really national in its perspective, because people were locally looking at things. It is only with the entry of Mahatma Gandhi into this nationalist movement that this entire Indian national movement was given a new status. It was given a new dimension, because Mahatma Gandhi played a very crucial role in bringing together the masses in a wide and a large scale. He was able to unify the masses on several common grounds, and he knew that it is with this united strength that the Indians could overthrow the colonial rule. With this in mind, let us now begin this discussion on how Mahatma Gandhi entered the nationalist movement and how the Indian national movement now assumed a new shape and dimension. Let us now time travel to the beginning of the 20th century. What do we find here? It was in the early half of the 20th century that Britain, along with several European powers, were embroiled in the Great First World War. And all these countries were severely affected. They were losing a lot of lives on the battlefield. And most important thing was that their economies were being severely depleted and drained by the cost that this huge war entailed. Now, India was a British colony, and when the First World War was happening between 1914 and 1918, Britain made sure to extort as much as possible from the Indian subcontinent so that it could make up for the losses that the First World War brought upon it. And so, after the outbreak of World War I, the British increased custom duties as well as introduced income tax in the Indian subcontinent so as to meet the defense expenditure. Because fighting a huge war, and in this case it was a world war, requires huge amount of resources, requires huge amount of money. And economy was faltering in Britain. So it made sure to take as much as possible away from India so that it could keep on fighting the war. Owing to the increased custom duties as well as the newly introduced income tax, prices of several commodities in the Indian subcontinent doubled between 1913 and 1918. So, if a piece of bread was formerly available for only 2 rupees, it was now available for 4 rupees. So it was a very difficult situation for the Indian masses to meet the growing demands of the Britishers as well as to survive with the prices of different commodities doubling between 1913 and 1918. Because the common masses were already being exploited by the Britishers, and so they were already rendered poor, they were rendered unemployed, and it became increasingly difficult for them to earn their living, to earn a piece of bread or meat. And this is what was happening during the First World War. So India was not directly involved in the First World War, but because it was a colony of Britain, it indirectly suffered very much during the years of the First World War. But this economic crisis, this hardship wasn't all that the First World War brought upon the Indians. This is because when this First World War was being fought, most of the European countries, or rather all the European countries that were embroiled in the war, kept on losing millions of soldiers on the battlefield, and they needed more and more men to fight in the war. Now, Britain knew that it could exploit the Indian masses. They were poor, they were vulnerable, and they did not have a say of their own. So, forcefully, now the British started enlisting the villagers, and these villagers were enlisted to fight in the war, and they were having to fight for the people who had colonized them. This was a pathetic and pitiable situation for the Indian masses. It were the Britishers who had colonized them, who had taken away their autonomy and independence, and it were the Britishers for whom they were having to lose their lives on the battlefields. So many Indian soldiers who were forcefully enlisted did not return home. They died on the battlefields, and several people returned injured. Now, these caused grave resentment in the minds of the masses. Why would they have to go and fight in an alien land for a foreign power? They were not even a part of the First World War directly. But unfortunately, this is what was happening to the villagers during the years of the First World War. Now, when these poor Indian people were fighting with the British soldiers in a faraway land, there remained no one to take care of agriculture in India. As a result of this, during the years of the war, agriculture suffered drastically in the Indian subcontinent because most of the villagers were enlisted in the army, and there remained little to no people to take care of the agricultural pursuits. And so, between 1918 and 1921, crops failed in many parts of India. And as a result of this, food shortages now started plaguing the Indian masses. Now, owing to these crop failures and the consequent food shortages, the Indian masses found it very difficult to procure even a piece of bread, even a piece of meat to feed themselves. Now, we need food to provide nutrition to our bodies. Without food, we won't be able to survive for long. And if we are deprived of the nutrition that our body requires, the different kinds of nutrients, minerals, vitamins that our body needs for sustenance, we will be weak, we will be malnourished. Our bodies will be prone to catching more diseases and illnesses. And this is what had happened to the Indian masses following the food shortages, because they were not able to feed themselves and their bodies kept on becoming weaker and weaker, and they became more prone to catching diseases. And this is how the influenza epidemic now spread among the masses. The masses' bodies could not resist this influenza pandemic, and a whole lot of people lost their lives to this influenza pandemic and several other diseases. So much so that according to the census of 1921, between 12 and 13 million people perished as a result of famines and an outbreak of influenza epidemic. So can you imagine the horrible condition of the Indian masses at this point of time? They were not able to feed themselves. They were having to go to a faraway land and lose their lives on the battlefield. And the masses who remained back in the Indian subcontinent had to battle famines and an epidemic. This image here shows you a ward in Lady Hardinge Hospital in Bombay, and this image was taken in 1918. Hundreds and hundreds of people were admitted to the hospital. They were malnourished, they were vulnerable to catching more and more diseases, and so many people lost their lives in this process. In situations when everything goes haywire, when everything takes an undesirable shape, we can only hope for good to happen. And this is what was happening to the Indian masses as well. They thought that when the First World War comes to an end, their misery would also come to an end. But unfortunately enough, their hopes for ending hardship post First World War were shattered when the British government passed the Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act, and this was also known as the Rowlatt Act of 1919. Now, the Rowlatt Act was the reason behind one of the most heinous episodes that happened in colonial India. But before getting into discussing what this Rowlatt Act was, let us now briefly introduce ourselves to this Rowlatt Act, as in the terms of the Rowlatt Act. Firstly, this Rowlatt Act necessitated repression of political activities. Now, the Britishers were increasingly threatened. They were being increasingly suspicious of the Indian masses and their activities. They knew that they had to curb and suppress all kinds of revolutionary and political activities that the Indian masses engaged in. And so this Rowlatt Act meant to repress all kinds of political activities in the Indian subcontinent. At the same time, this Rowlatt Act also allowed the detention of political prisoners without trial for 2 years. Can you imagine how horrible this was? Because the political prisoners were detained even without trial, and many of these political prisoners were actually innocent. They were wrongly accused and convicted by the British government, and they were detained for 2 long years. And last but not the least, the Rowlatt Act also brought about widespread censorship of press, because press always plays a very important role in bringing forward the ideas that might often contradict the popular or the majoritarian ideas. And so when revolutionary and rebellious ideas were being published by the press, the British government made sure to censor press so that nothing that was contrary to the government's ideals was published. So in the truest sense of the term, the Rowlatt Act was very repressive. It was a horrible act. And in a while we will also learn about what this Rowlatt Act had caused to the Indian masses. Now, till this while in this discussion we have talked about how the Indian masses were being repressed and they were being exploited by the Britishers. And these Indian masses were filled with nationalist ideas, filled with hatred and contempt of the British rule, but all these nationalistic movements or whatever those were, those remained confined within certain local territorial units. So the Indian national movement wasn't a real national movement prior to this. But who was that leader who gave this Indian national movement a national status, who took forward this national movement to such a dimension that the Britishers ultimately had to retreat? Well, it was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born on October 2, 1869 at a place called Porbandar in the present-day Indian state of Gujarat. And Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi later on came to be popularly known as Mahatma Gandhi. Now, Mahatma Gandhi's family members wanted him to be an attorney, and so they had sent him to England to study law. And upon returning to India, Gandhi was appointed by an Indian law firm called Dada Abdullah and Company. And this law firm now sent Gandhi to South Africa as their representative to fight for a case. And when Gandhi was sent to South Africa, he underwent a life-changing experience. It is upon us to find out how positive or negative this life-changing experience was and what it was all about. Before proceeding with this lesson, let me ask you a question. Where was Mahatma Gandhi sent as a representative of Dada Abdullah and Company? Was he sent to South Africa, England, France or Iran? Well, the correct answer is South Africa. Upon completing his studies in law, Gandhi had joined this law firm called Dada Abdullah and Company, and this law firm had sent Mahatma Gandhi to South Africa as a representative for a law case.
Excuse me, sir. How long have you been in South Africa?
A week.
I don't know how you got a ticket.
Just what are you doing in this car, Coolie?
Why, I have a ticket. A first-class ticket.
How did you get out of it?
I sent for it in the post. I'm an attorney and I didn't have time.
There are no colored attorneys in South Africa. Go and sit where you belong.
I'll take your luggage back, sir.
No. Just a moment, please. You see? Mohandas K. Gandhi, attorney at law. I'm on my way to Pretoria to conduct a case for an Indian trading firm.
Didn't you hear me? There are no colored attorneys in South Africa.
Sir, I was called to the bar in London and enrolled at the High Court of Chancery. I am, therefore, an attorney. And since I am, in your eyes, colored, I think we can deduce that there is at least one colored attorney in South Africa.
Smart bloody Kaffir. Throw him.
Just move your black ass back to third class, or I'll have you thrown over the next station.
But I always go first class. I've traveled all...
What we saw here is a clip from the 1982 movie called Gandhi. Now here we were introduced to a very important point. We need to remember that it was in 1893 that Gandhi was thrown off a train in South Africa on account of his race, on account of his color. With this, he was initiated to the racism that the non-whites were exposed to, that the non-whites had to suffer in South Africa. He felt very severely humiliated, and at the same time, he took it upon himself to somehow change this way of things. And Gandhi had certain important weapons at his disposal. And he continued to use these weapons till the end of his life, till the end of his fight. But are you thinking that these were physical weapons? Most definitely not. The weapons that Gandhi made use of very efficiently were ahimsa and satyagraha. Now these principles of ahimsa and satyagraha were used as very important tool by Mahatma Gandhi in his fight for the rights of the colored people in South Africa. Ahimsa means non-violence and satyagraha means following the path of truth. Mahatma Gandhi realized that with violence no one can achieve any goal. It is with non-violence that a person will be able to get across their thoughts, get across their ideas among the masses. And at the same time, if one follows the path of truth, success and victory will most definitely follow them. And so, he used these methods of ahimsa and satyagraha first in South Africa to fight for the rights of the colored people. Now what we see here is an image of Indian workers in South Africa marching through Volksrust on November 6, 1913. Now these Indian workers were marching from Newcastle to Transvaal, and they were peacefully protesting for their rights because they were discriminated against on account of their skin color, on account of their racial origin. And Mahatma Gandhi had provided leadership to these Indian workers, and when they were stopped on their path, Mahatma Gandhi adopted and used the methods of ahimsa and satyagraha to peacefully negotiate with the police officers, to peacefully put across his thought that colorism and racism should be put an end to. Now, Mahatma Gandhi became aware of what was happening in India under the British colonial rule. The Indian masses were being repressed, they were being tortured, they were being brutally beaten up, they were being exploited by the colonial rule in every possible way. And upon familiarizing himself with the happenings in the Indian subcontinent, Mahatma Gandhi returned to India in 1915, and he came here with the goal of bringing the nation independence from the colonial rule. And it is here in this Indian national movement as well that he used the methods or the policies of ahimsa or non-violence and satyagraha or following the path of truth. Now Mahatma Gandhi knew upon returning to India that it wasn't very easy to launch a whole movement, because in order to launch a movement the masses needed to be unified. Work had to be done at the local stage so that a national movement could be organized. And so Gandhi now initially successfully organized satyagraha campaigns in 1917 and 1918. So in these satyagraha campaigns he now started reaching out to the masses. He traveled to a place called Champaran in Bihar, where the indigo cultivators were being exploited by the landowners and the British officials. And so he now gave them leadership. He now launched a satyagraha campaign in Champaran. Then he also went to Kheda in Gujarat, where the peasants were suffering. Now these peasants at Kheda had suffered very much because of the crop failures and food shortages, and so they were demanding that the unpaid taxes should be remitted. In this protest as well, Mahatma Gandhi gave them leadership, and he also went to the cotton mill workers who were exploited. So in places like Champaran, Kheda as well as Ahmedabad, Mahatma Gandhi played a very important role in providing leadership to the masses. At the same time, he also could reach out to the masses, because he now started becoming increasingly popular among the masses. The masses in fact saw him as a messiah, as a savior, as someone who was sent to liberate them from the oppressors, from the colonizers. In his fight against the colonial rule, Gandhi also campaigned against social evils that were prevalent in the Indian subcontinent. Social evils in the likes of untouchability. So caste-based oppression has been prevalent in the Indian subcontinent for many centuries, and untouchability was an expression of the same. He fought against this social evil of untouchability, and likewise he also fought against this social evil of alcoholism. He was also fighting for women so that ill treatment of women could be stopped. So in this way Gandhi was able to reach among the masses, and the masses were also identifying him with a spirit of nationalism, with a spirit that could overthrow colonial rule from the subcontinent. So in this lesson, we learned how Mahatma Gandhi entered the Indian national movement. His policies of ahimsa and satyagraha played very crucial roles in giving shape to several movements that happened in the subcontinent during colonial rule. We also learnt about how he had organized certain successful satyagraha campaigns. Having learnt about this, we should also focus on how Mahatma Gandhi launched national large-scale movements. He knew it very well that in order to bring about a national, large-scale and a huge movement that would leave a positive impact on the society, he required to bring the masses together. So having learnt about Mahatma Gandhi and how he entered the national movement, in a subsequent lesson we will be taking a short detour and going back to the Rowlatt Act. In this beginning of this lesson, we learnt about how repressive the Rowlatt Act was. In a subsequent lesson, we will be talking about one such heinous and horrible incident that happened entirely because of this imposition of the Rowlatt Act. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.